Good morning. Thank you, Mike, and thank you to the congregation here at Tabor for inviting us to come and share. This really is for South Dakota on top of the mountain. Yeah. I've been in eastern Montana and seen places like this too. I'm very, very grateful for this, and inviting the Sverdrup Society to come and share in a discussion forum and share with you some of the principles of Sverdrup's understanding of congregational theology. In other words, what is a biblical Christian congregation? Why is it important? And then also of his congregational polity. Polity is a fancy theological term for how a congregation is governed and how it works within the congregation and how it relates to other congregations. And I'm not going to get into a long theology about that, but I'd like to introduce the Sverdrup Society. The purpose of the Sverdrup Society is to promote and extend the thought of Sverdrup in his understanding of the biblical congregation. To that end, we have a couple of different projects in mind. One of them is to translate from the Norwegian his writings, which have been gathered into a 6-volume set. This is the first volume of what is Sverdrup's Skrifter i Udvalg, or something like that. I can read Norwegian, I can't pronounce it very good. The second purpose is to develop a theological journal which contains these translations and also articles on his thought that develop the history of the fundamental of his thought, of his life, and also other articles which develop further his theology and maybe bring it into the, I almost said the 20th century, but I skip that one over and bring it into the 21st century as it applies to congregations today. I have forms that will allow you to become a member and a supporting member of the society, and we will be handing these out just before the next session. We'll talk about this. We do have sets of journals from the first journal up until now. And Loyal, what was last year's volume?
It's 14. This is 15, the one that's published right now.
Okay, 1 through 14. How much have we been charging for the set of the previous?
We sort of been locked into it. $5 a piece, but we sell the whole works for $55. Rather.
$55. You can buy a set of previous journals for $50. If you want to purchase those, you can talk to me during one of the breaks. I do have a couple of books available that somehow I got an extra copy of Free and Living Congregations, The Dream That Would Not Die. It's volume 2 of the AFLC Heritage Series, and it has a series of articles outlining Sverdrup's thought on the Christian congregation. This normally goes for about, I think it's over $20 now, if that's correct. I got this as a gift. I don't need 2 copies. I'll sell this to you for $15, which is a really good deal. If somebody doesn't have a copy of this and would like it, the $15. And also a biography of Sverdrup. This was a gift, and I have a copy already. If anyone would like this also, I think a new probably goes for $20, $25. I'll sell this for 15 if anyone would like a copy of this. Okay, what's going to happen today? I have very carefully printed out a 30 to 40 copies of the schedule for today and was going to hand one out to everybody, see what was going on. I left that on my desk. So, with the wonder of smartphones, my wife took a picture of this and she sent it to me, so I have this here, and my phone doesn't want to turn it so it's more easily readable. 3 sessions today. First, by myself, Sverdrup's vision of free and living congregations. Session 2, Reverend Alex Amiat from Thief River Falls. My favorite theme, the congregation as the bride of Christ. The congregation itself is the bride of Christ. I just ran across a quote by an AFLC pastor, and he said that one point has made all the difference in his ministry. It's one of the most important things that he learned in his seminary training, is understanding what the congregation is as the bride of Christ. The 3rd session, Reverend Rader Huglin, Dufolden, Minnesota. Rader, thank you to you for coming, and he will be sharing on the free congregation, both in the Lutheran Free Church and in the Association of Free Lutheran Congregations. Raynard served in this area, I'm not quite sure of the years. Did he serve this congregation? Served this congregation in this parish, I think back in the 60s. He'll let us know.
9 years?
Yeah, 63 to 72, just about 9 years.
All right. Just in time to go to the Bible school of Demon Men and run roughshod over a bunch of kids straight out of high school. And I was one of them. Except I was so shy, I think that nobody even knew I was there. What time do we have? Okay, this will go till what time is it here? 10:15. Take a little bit of a break before that.
Which we do have coffee and creamery downstairs for you, if
Yes.
you'd like for your break.
So we will have a little break here, and we can get reloaded and recaffeinated and re-Norwegian here, or something like that. Yeah. So about a 10-minute break, and we'll come back upstairs. All right. Sverdrup's vision of free and living congregations. Under Sverdrup's influence, this phrase, free and living congregations, became the model of the Lutheran Free Church, 1897 to 1963, and after that, the Association of Free Lutheran Congregations, 1963 to the present. Free and living congregations. This phrase points up Sverdrup's 2 fundamental concerns for the congregation. That the congregation be, according to the New Testament, first, free, and second, living. And these 2 concerns were not something that he found when he finally came here to America, but it was concerns that were formed in his heart and in his mind, even when he was in Norway, as a young man and as a theological student, because of his experience in Norway. What I will be doing here in this paper, I'll be reading part of it and then making comments, and hopefully I don't go on too long, is I'd like to look at those formative influences from Norway itself on this concept of both the free and the living congregation, and then I'm going to narrow the focus a little bit and then look at, in his more mature thought, as he continued in the United States, his understanding of what a free congregation was. I was going to do a little bit on both terms, but I realized that there wouldn't be quite time for that. So let's go back to Norway with a young man who was growing up in a parsonage in Balestrand, Norway, which is on the Sognefjord near Leikanger, where my family was from. In fact, Sverdrup was born about 15 years before my grandfather. Think of that. Just a few miles away. He then went to school in Oslo at the Nissan, I think it would have been the equivalent of a college, the Nissan Latin School, and then he would have gone on to the University of Oslo, into the theological seminary. During this time, the first and the major influences that shaped Sverdrup's understanding of the biblical congregation were the two spiritual awakenings that visited Norway in the 18th century. The catalyst for the first awakening was the preaching of Hans Nielsen Hauge, 1871 to 1824. Hans Nielsen Hauge was a young layman who experienced a conversion to Christ while plowing in a field on his father's farm in 1896. Hauge became convinced that he was called by God to be a witness.
1796?
1796. Thank you. Thank you, Alex. There's a reason we have younger pastors. The old ones start to just kind of fade away. He became convinced that he was called by God to be a witness to Christ, and he began to preach the gospel wherever people would listen. First at his own farm, then in the neighborhood, and then he began to walk to the near towns and preach wherever people would listen. And finally, and ultimately, he walked the full length of Norway. Over the course of 8 years, thousands of Norwegians, primarily among the bonder or the lower class farmers, were converted under Hauge's preaching. The second awakening was led by Gisle Johnson, who was a theological professor at the University of Oslo. His lifespan was 1822 to 1894. Through Johnson's preaching and his influence on theological students, the awakening begun under Hauge spread from the lower classes into the clergy and out of the rural areas and into the cities. From Sverdrup's experience with these awakenings, Sverdrup took with him a concern for true spiritual life in the congregations. He saw that Christianity was more than tradition. more than form and ritual, and that theology had a purpose. And that was awakening and creating spiritual life in the members of a congregation, to the point where you could say that this congregation is a living body of Christ. The second major influence that shaped Sverdrup's understanding of the biblical congregation was the Norwegian state church system. In Norway, the Lutheran Church was now get this, was a department of state. And it was placed under a civil administrator, under the Minister of Education and Religion. If you can imagine a Christianity being placed under the Department of Education here in the United States. I'm not saying that as a political issue, but you've got to look at it as a spiritual issue. The state was seen as the guardian and the caretaker for the Lutheran Church. Most other sects were either illegal or tightly controlled. The state cared for all the needs of the Lutheran Church. And now think here, you who are here from Tabor, think of this. The state trained the pastors, built churches, maintained them. You wouldn't worry about this building, but the state would maintain it. Provided parsonages and paid salaries for the pastor, for the organist, for the Christian education teacher, etc., etc., etc. Naturally, some saw the state church as a great benefit. But Sverdrup saw the provision of the state as nothing more than spiritual bondage that hindered life in the congregation. How could he say that? Dependency on the state kept believers from spiritual maturity by not allowing them to shoulder responsibility for their own congregations. Do you understand that there? Yeah, that's the point. According to Andreas Helen, the state church impaired the will to work and had thus retarded spiritual progress in the congregation. Sverdrup became convinced that the biblical congregation is one that is free not only from the state, but free from subjection to human authority. As a result of these influences, Sverdrup developed a vision of what he believed the New Testament congregation was to be. Both free to assume responsibility for itself and thus be dependent more and more on the Spirit of God, and living where the believers not only know correct Lutheran doctrine, but through the Spirit of God are made alive through those doctrines, to where the congregation is a living congregation. And he carried this with him as he came to America and took up his work as a theological professor at Augsburg Seminary in Minneapolis in 1874, and as a church leader in the Norwegian Lutheran churches in the United States. Now, with this as the background, I'm going to ask the question, what did Sverdrup mean by the phrase, lit a free congregation? What is a free congregation? As seen above, a free congregation is a congregation that is free from the authority of the state. In an address that he gave on Thanksgiving Day, I'm not quite sure of the year, Sverdrup commented on the opportunities that you find in America. And he focused most squarely on the issue of freedom. And in that article, Sverdrup saw America with its guarantee of freedom of religion and, in his words, complete separation of church and state as a God-given opportunity to establish truly free Lutheran congregations. And this is why he came to America. Sverdrup had come to believe that the Lutheran congregations in Norway would not truly become free of the state in his lifetime. And that vision of free congregations was so much a part of him that is what led him to come to the United States, because he saw this as an opportunity to shape the Lutheran congregations so that in the United States that they would truly be free. This was his vision. This was his reason for coming. However, Sverdrup was an astute theologian, and he knew that freedom from the state church system and simply existing here in America under the separation of church and state would not guarantee that the congregations would truly be free. If that were true, Sverdrup said, the Roman Catholic Church would be an example of free congregations, because they were free of the power of the state. But, he said, the congregations of the Catholic Church were not free because they were bound under the authority and the domination of the clergy. So we come to the second point. Not only is a free congregation free from the state, a free congregation is free from domination by the clergy. In the spring of 1874, Sven Oftedal, who became Luther's lifelong co-worker, published an article titled The Open Declaration, which was a strongly worded attack against the Norwegian Synod, another Lutheran synod, Norwegian Lutheran group at that time. And he accused the synod of what he called Catholicizing tendencies. Okay, here is one Lutheran calling the other out for Catholicizing tendencies. And they said this hit like a bombshell. It was so strongly worded that the people couldn't believe it. The Norwegian Synod said, we don't even know what to say. The church back in Norway, the theological professors, were aghast that the Americans and Norwegians were attacking each other in this way. And even the leaders and fellow pastors in Oftedal's church body felt he had gone a ways too far. But when Sverdrup came to the United States late in 1880, 1874, let's keep that straight, he defended Oftedal. He said maybe his language was a little bit too strong. But, he said, he's right. By the term Catholicizing tendencies, Oftedal had meant a couple of different things, and part of Oftedal's accusation was that the congregations of the Norwegian Synod, like the congregations in the Roman Catholic Church, were not truly free, but were dominated by the clergy. In other words, in the Norwegian Synod, the clergy were a spiritual elite who had the training that the lay people didn't have, and therefore they had the right and the position to make decisions for the congregations. And to be an authority over the congregations. And what Sverdrup said was that this bound the congregations, and the congregations were not free because the responsibility to make real and vital decisions about spiritual matters were taken off the shoulders of the congregation. And they became spiritually, and they were left spiritually immature. You do not become mature unless you have to shoulder real issues, real responsibilities, and be forced to depend on the Spirit to make those decisions. Free from domination by the clergy. Third, a free congregation is free from the authority of the church body. Before 1890, Sverdrup advocated a modified, what time is it here, Bill? Okay. A free congregation is free from the authority of the church body. Before 1890, Sverdrup advocated a modified congregational polity that emphasized the autonomy of the congregation, yet reserved some authority for the church body. In preparation for the merger of 1890, some advocated that the United Church would only be an advisory body to the congregations, and that decisions made at the annual conference of the United Church would not be binding on the congregations. For practical reasons, Sverdrup rejected this proposal and said that the church body must retain some authority. But because of his bitter experience with the United Church in the 1890s over what was called the Augsburg Controversy, that ultimately led to the president of the church body throwing out, I think, 12 or 15 congregations. Sverdrup changed his mind on the authority of the church body. Authority that is placed in the church body and in the annual conference, he believed, became a tool for a majority of the congregations to dominate and exercise authority over a minority. Thus, when the fundamental principles of the Lutheran Free Church were adopted in 1898, the fifth fundamental principle read, "The congregation directs its own affairs subject to the authority of the Word and the Spirit of God, and acknowledges no other ecclesiastical authority or government above itself." A biblical congregation, Sverdrup believed, is subject only to the authority of the Word and the Spirit of God. And what he would say at this point is that the freedom of the Christian demands the freedom of the congregation. Any authority over the congregation, he said, could become a tool to dominate the congregation. We'd like to stop at this point, but Sverdrup's vision of a free congregation is not exhausted when the congregation is free from human authority, whether that authority is the state, the clergy, or the church body. In fact, it can be said that freedom from human authority, all of these things that we just talked about, is only a minor part of his understanding of congregational freedom. It's only a minor part, and there's much more to the idea of a free congregation than being free from human authority. For Sverdrup, a true free congregation is a congregation that is spiritually free. And this is so important. Free from bondage to sin and worldliness, and freedom from bondage to the coercion of the law. Sverdrup writes, "There can be no talk of congregational freedom as long as men are either impelled by the whip of covetousness or coerced by the hard yoke of the law. The bondage of vice and the compulsion of the law are both irreconcilable with the free congregation." Note what Sverdrup is saying. A congregation is never truly free if it is bound either by the bondage of sin. And can that happen in a Christian congregation? You bet it can. Or under the compulsion of legalism. Could that happen? Yes. Sven Oftedal, Sverdrup's lifelong co-worker, writes that the free congregation is one that is set free by the gospel and permeated by the Spirit. By free congregation, we mean not congregations that have been freed from the domination of the state or even from the domination of the priesthood or the papacy, but congregations that are truly free in Christ, their individual members set free through the gospel, permeated, ruled, and motivated by the Spirit of God according to the Word. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Believers set free by the power of the gospel. Now wait a minute. Throughout the centuries, men have argued that Christians cannot be freed from the law because that will only lead to spiritual license. If you set people free, they'll just go out and do whatever they want. But Sverdrup and Oftedal understood that true Christian freedom expresses itself in a new slavery. Under the leading of the Spirit, the one who is free uses his freedom to become a servant. Sverdrup writes, "This then is freedom, that each man and each woman who loves the Lord may have the permission and opportunity to serve him in the congregation." And again, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Freedom to work. Freedom to suffer. Freedom to live for a cause. And freedom to die for a cause. And here I get to quote myself. It's kind of fun doing that. Here is the genius of freedom through the eyes of Sverdrup. He saw the free congregation. But this freedom is not the freedom of the flesh, the freedom to do what one wants. This freedom is the freedom of the Spirit, the freedom to be what God intends one to be, a servant of God. Thus, a truly free congregation is a congregation of servants. And when the members of the congregation are nothing more than servants of God by His Spirit, then the congregation has achieved the highest form of freedom. Thank you. I wish that I had time to discuss Sverdrup's concept of the living congregation. But that would take another half hour, and we have Alex here for that. I'd like to entertain any questions that you may have at this point. And after that, we can have a little bit of a break and come back and have our next session. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask at this point over what we talked about? Anything at all?
From your reading of Sverdrup, did he acknowledge that he had changed in his position because of the actions of the United Church, or is that more just an observation that you're making personally? Did he write about that at all?
Yeah, his writings show a definite change and development. Sverdrup's ecclesiology, or his understanding of it is the theology of the church and congregation, that never changed. And his theology never changed, ecclesiology never changed, but his polity, it was based on his ecclesiology, that developed over time as he was here and went through various experiences here in the United States, here in America. Yeah. And did he consciously write, I'm changing my thought? No, I don't think he really consciously said that, but you can see there is a real difference from before 1890 to after 1890. Yeah.
Pastor Horn,
Yes.
the book you held up towards the end by Hamry, biography of Hamry,
Yes.
about him. In that, it discusses that issue you're raising. It's a very interesting one where Sverdrup actually did say you can't have a bunch of meetings where the people with a bunch of copperheads are telling you what to do. And he's quoted in that.
Yeah.
Which is just a sore spot in my book, but it is something he had written at one time
Yeah.
in his early years, but then he came to really regret that.
Yeah.
Because then he could see the authority of the church body that at the annual conference could absolutely destroy individual congregations. And he backtracked. But that's why it's bothered, and I think you are aware of that too, Pastor Horton, where there have been certain people that have said, hey, Sverdrup, what happened to him? He switched his tune. What's wrong with him? The guy could never be consistent. But there are reasons why he's changed.
Yeah.
For the good, we might add.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Comments?